Okay, Abigail, do you think we can start? Have we got most of the attendees here?
Yeah, people have started to roll in, so I think we can begin, and anyone else who arrives can hear our introductions as they sign in.
Okay. Well, let's just wait one more second.
Yeah.
And
we've got a couple of people coming in, so it's
okay.
Yeah. If we just wait till 2-3 minutes past, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, I think we should start. So
Perfect.
welcome everybody. Abigail, yes?
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, great. Okay. Sorry, we are just trying to communicate to make sure that we have everybody here. My name is Nicola Jennings. I'm the director of the Athena Art Foundation. I'd like to welcome you all to this talk tonight. We're delighted to have as our guest Adrienne Childs, Dr. Adrienne Childs, and I'm going to introduce her properly in just a second. Adrienne and I have worked together in the past, so she's an old friend now. But first of all, let me just tell you a little bit about the Athena Art Foundation in case this is the first time you're joining us. We are a UK-based charity, non-profit, what you would call in the United States, dedicated to promoting pre-20th century art from around the world. We do various things. One of them is we hold these monthly Zoom sessions where we talk to curators, art historians, collectors, artists whose work in some way responds to earlier traditions of art. And we also have an Instagram account, which I urge you to follow. And we occasionally do in-person events as well. In London and in New York, we have patrons groups. So if you're interested in that, do get in touch with us and let us know. If you look at the website, there's a contact form on the website. So by all means, get in touch. Tonight, the format will be that my colleague Abigail and I will be asking Adrienne some questions about her new book, which I'm going to tell you about in a second, or she will actually tell you about. And then there'll be some time. So we'll speak probably for about 40 minutes, and then there will be some time for questions. And as this is a webinar, we would ask you to type your questions in the chat box, and we will try and make sure that we get round to everybody at the end. And we'd love it if you ask. I think Adrienne would love it if you ask some questions, because it makes for a good discussion. So let me just briefly introduce Adrienne. Adrienne is an independent scholar, art historian, and curator. She's senior consulting curator at the Phillips Collection. Her current book is an exploration of Black figures in European decorative arts, which she's going to talk about. But she's also currently co-curator of Vivian Brown, My Kind of Protest, for the Phillips Collection. She recently co-curated with me The Color of Anxiety, Race, Sex, Sexuality and Disorder in Victorian Sculpture at the Henry Moore Institute in Leeds. That's in England. And she was guest curator of Rifts and Relations, African American Artists and the European Modernist Tradition at the Phillips Collection in Washington, D.C. in 2020. In April 22, the High Museum of Art awarded Adrienne the 2022 Driscoll Prize in recognition of her contribution to African American art and art history. Childs co-curated the Black figure in the European Imaginary at the Cornell Fine Arts Museum at Rollins College in 2017. She's a co-editor of the volume of essays Blacks and Blackness in European Art of the Long 19th Century. She also contributed an essay on art and activism to volume 5, part 2 of the amazing The Image of the Black in Western Art, edited by Henry Louis Gates Jr. and David Bindman. So I could go on and on, but I think we'll just start now. Adrienne, welcome. So lovely to see you again and be in touch again.
Oh, well, thank you very much for inviting me, Nicola and Abigail. It's a thrill to be able to talk about my favorite conversations around ornamental blackness.
Great. Well, let's start then with what is ornamental blackness? I mean, how do you define this phrase?
Well, it's interesting. The entire book tries to define it, but what I want, the simple answer is that it is a style or a trend, let's say, in which the Black figure, a figure of a Black person, is treated as a decorative motif, and largely in European decorative arts, but I think it really can be expanded globally. Um, and so it's just a very simple answer. That's ornamental blackness. But what when it starts to get interesting is when you think about what are all the implications and the contexts of these Black figures being considered fashionable luxury motifs in certain at certain times in history and in certain contexts. The meanings just multiply and multiply and multiply. But it was just a way when I started thinking about it for me to describe what I was seeing across a lot of kind of objects. And so it was just a term I just came up with. And then I know we'll talk about that later. How did I start thinking about this? But I was trying to describe all these different objects that I saw that had a kind of subservient figure as an ornamental motif. And I said, it's kind of an ornamental blackness. And so there we have it.
Well, I highly recommend that people get hold of your book and look through it because the objects are really extraordinary. And I think I asked you this when we met recently. I mean, it's extraordinary that so many of them are still on view in, in houses, sort of country houses, as we call them in the UK, in museums, in all sorts of things. And I think we'll talk about that a little bit later on, even in contemporary culture. Anyway, I'm going to I'll hand over to Abigail, who's going to ask the next question.
Yeah, so should we, yeah, perfect. So a figure that's really central to this is the so-called blackamoor. And what is this? And then I have a follow-up for you on that as well.
Good. Ask me the questions because that'll spark my my memory and the way I'm thinking about it. It's so complicated, but the term is really derived from a term that actually described people in England, particularly. The English term for a Moor, or a person from Africa, North Africa specifically. And then it's also kind of linked to the understanding of the Moors that were taking over in the Iberian Peninsula. So it's a historical concept of this nebulous figure who was a Moor, and racially it could be they called them, there were white Moors, there were tawny Moors, there were black Moors, there were all kinds of different types of people coming from this part of the world that were kind of their identity was collapsed into this term Moor. And then Moor became a character in plays. The more, the Shakespeare talks about Moors. Anyway, so the more, and what happens then at some point, I think I want to call it the 18th century, when they start calling these figures, these statues, and you see two examples here. I wouldn't call them statues. They're really furniture. They're furnishings that you put in your home to hold something. And then these two that you're looking at are holding, they're probably holding either bowls, or they're holding flowers or fruits, and they would maybe be put on the either side of a doorway, or on either side of a fireplace. But at any rate, that the term for the indeterminate term Moor for a person of color from an exotic locale gets co-opted into this term for the furniture, right? But these objects existed in being called other things in other places. Like in France, they were called guéridons. So, but by the 18th century, they're called blackamoors in England, and by the 19th century, blackamoor is like a ubiquitous term for this kind of decorative person. But these people were coming in from sub-Saharan Africa. They weren't just from North Africa, and they were actually not linked to any individuals. It's not about individual identity. It's about the projection of what Europeans see as a subservient body, dressed in this livery, dark skin, and it's a fantasy figure.
Yeah, and it's a term that some scholars see as quite problematic. What do you sort of think about? Not so much. What do you think about it, and how do you kind of navigate the using of it and discussing these artworks?
Well, yes, it's problematic. It's an antiquated term, like many of the antiquated terms that we have to contend with. So it is not as pointed as the N word, but it is another, like I said, a reductive word that has no real roots in any real identity. For me, it's hard when museums and start taking the word off of out of their let's say their records, because then when I'm coming to look for this kind of figure and its historical presence, it's been changed to standing man, or so I don't know, those clues, that the racialized clues are erased because they're offensive. But I think they need to be kept in the archival material, because it also goes to show what the attitude. I mean, this is, if I'm going to be critical of it, I have to have proof that of the way they were being conceived of, and if they're now called standing man, I can't say they were conceived of in a certain way. So
it takes the contextualization, really, but not the term itself shouldn't be perhaps
right. But at one point, the slide you're showing is the page from a dictionary, a decorative arts dictionary. When I first started this project, I can't tell you how many years ago, I said, well, let's just look in the dictionary, and then sure enough, there they were, just unproblematic, blackamoor, English furniture, blah, blah, So that goes to show you that they were normalized, just like you would have a certain kind of chair. Blackamoor, it's a standard figure.
Okay, Nicola, do you want to?
Yeah. So how did this project first take shape for you? There's a picture of you next to one.
Oh,
there.
yes. I love that figure, even though he's broken. Well, that was me in Florence, obviously, 2015, at an exhibition where they used a large collection of blackamoor figures in a contemporary art installation, and they asked the artist to respond. So, but this was I was well on my way in this journey. I was doing a dissertation on exoticism in European painting and sculpture, but I kept coming across these figures, sugar bowls, these kind of, and I already knew about these kinds of figures. I didn't know how many there were in Europe, but you see them around in the United States, and they're kind of offensive and gaudy, but I kept seeing these figures that were kind of analogous or analogs to the painting and sculpture, sort of embodiments, decorative embodiments. And one of my arguments in my dissertation was that the Black figures in painting served a decorative purpose. So I get these other little things and put them together and say, okay, because we also see decorative objects that have them. And so that's where it kind of started. And that's where I use that term. Oh, they reflect a kind of ornamental blackness. And even when I wrote it, I said, oh, this is a good project. Little did I know it would take me 20 years, 15 to finish. But yeah, so it was a spark, but it was coming out of my other project. But it also was the road less traveled. When I finished my degree, I thought I was still doing a lot of work, and I still am in African American art. And there is a very big connection between race and representation in America and in Europe. But anyway, I saw that pursuing this idea, because it was absolutely not being pursued anywhere, as the more fruitful and more interesting thing to do. You know, when you're coming out of a dissertation, you know, what am I going to pursue? I'm not going to try to get the whole thing published. So this is what came out of that, and I think it had changed and morphed over the years. But in it, yeah. So I'll just stop there.
Well, the book is well worth it. I mean, it may have taken you 15 years, but you know, it's worth it.
Thank you.
So, Abigail, do you want to go on to the next question?
Yeah, so sort of coming back to this idea about ornamental blackness and the blackamoor, can you tell us a bit about how they were and are inextricably linked to the transatlantic slave trade, racism, and the appetite for luxury goods and exotic materials in these sort of South Atlantic and world and beyond?
Well, this little sugar box here on the bottom left from the Rijksmuseum is the object that got me going on this. But anyway, because when I saw it and I used it, or somebody just like her, another Meissen box, for my dissertation, and I went to go look at all the books and articles on, you know, this topic of decorative arts and slavery and all that. None, of course, it doesn't exist, right? So, but to me, it just slapped me in the face. It's a sugar bowl, and there's a slave basically serving it to you in this luxury material, porcelain. And then this is from the 1840s. This is not too long after porcelain was sort of reinvented, if you will, by Meissen. And it becomes a popular design. There are a lot of them around. Anyway, so it seems to me that, wow, are they not making the connections between the labor that brings the sugar to the table and this kind of representation? And they weren't. And so then all you do is start looking wide and seeing that it's not only sugar, but it's coffee. And there are coffee pots with Black people's heads on them. And then coffee is a colonial commodity that's being harvested in Brazil. It's in other places in the world as well, but in the Caribbean as well. And the wealth that many of these countries are gaining based on the labor of Black people is being celebrated in many ways in these kinds of objects that are linked to the very commodities that they're harvesting, or that their labor is part of the sort of system, right? But then there's also things that you don't see. You may not be as may not be as sort of apparent, like something like ebony. Ebony is a very important material, luxury material in France, you know, ébénistes, and in the Baroque era and even before. But ebony is coming to into Europe through the labor of enslaved people in East Africa, in Mauritius, on the island off of East Africa. And it's also coming, the Dutch are very much involved in all this. And it's also coming through Indonesia, but there is a lot of ebony that is affiliated, part of this system of this trade. So you're trading bodies, you're trading ebony, you're trading pearls. And so this economic system of luxury goods and Black bodies and then everyday commodities are all part of the same system. And so when you see a beautiful cabinet by Gaulle, the French ébéniste, you know, it is embedded in that system as well. So you can either see, or then many times you'll see Black figures made out of ebony. So they're not only making these beautiful, maybe inlaid cabinets, but you might find a Black person made out of ebony, in which you really are carving this actual servant or the slave who brought that to you. So it's really entangled in ways that are very disturbing, because you think to yourself, you're really celebrating a system that's really system of degradation and exploitation. And that's why nobody wants to talk about it. And this is not the only thing, you know, we could even go to today when you're talking about certain kind of corporate manufacturing. But anyway, so that's all kind of embedded there. And even Black slaves in the 19th century, you have a lot of references to in French, they were called bois d'ébène, ebony wood. So even you know, if you have a ship, it's carrying bois d'ébène. So there's a lot of this crossover of colonial commodity and luxury goods. And I'm saying luxury goods because there's more to it there, but I stuck to looking at luxury goods for several different reasons, and I can talk about it if you want to. But this is not an easy kind of topic to get at, particularly with decorative arts, because you could have all kinds of things. You can go to antique shops and you don't know what you're looking at. So I said, I'm going to stick to things that have been vetted. We know where, at least they're in a museum somewhere. Now, we often don't know who made them, but sometimes we do. They have provenance. We know what they are. And so many of them have makers associated with them, and so we can follow that. So that's one of the reasons I stuck to this kind of luxury good, because once you start getting further and further afield, there might be some interesting stuff, but you have no idea where it came from or when it was even made.
It's a whole other project really as well, isn't it, to look beyond how that's then disseminated through popular culture materials and all of that. I'm fascinated by this, by the sugar bowl. It's just such a blatant expression of that material entanglement.
Yes. Yeah, and you even see here in the prints, you know, the laborers with the sugar, the bale, and sugar is the sugar production was probably one of the most horrific and dangerous and of all of the industries. The people died young, and they were worked to death. It was very dangerous. So that's why in England the abolitionists would have a sugar bowl that said "sugar not made by slaves." Yeah. So there was.
I think that
there is a consciousness then, really, isn't there, in the moment? I guess, you know, highly contested
in the 18th century,
for a very long time.
Well, the British who were into, you know, the abolitionist movement, they were very conscious of this.
Did you find
I think that
sorry, Nicola. Did you find when you were researching these goods I mean, obviously these artifacts really speak for themselves in a lot of ways, but did you come across any sort of written sort of acknowledging that they're celebrating something, or or fighting against it in any way, sort of, because clearly there is this sort of consciousness to it as well, even if it's a kind of consciousness constructed very differently to how we look at it and see these ideas.
I think I could have probably found more if I was really looking for it, but and then it would have been more in the 19th century. You might find that there's certainly a pushback against slavery, a pushback against the servants that were representing the high life, if you will. I mean, the kind of the way Hogarth, for instance, thinks about these Black servants that are supposed to be luxury items. So there's pushback against that, and then these kind of blackamoor figures are directly related to the lived experiences of Black servants in courts. So, but I was so busy just trying to get the fundamental story down that I didn't do that as much as I may have.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's marvelous to have such a great rich corpus documenting that material history there.
Yeah, it's like a story.
Anyway, sorry, I'll pass back to Nicola because I'll keep rambling for too long about the research process.
No, I was just really fascinated. I mean, you know, obviously you've got these luxury objects, but it's all those blackamoors, you know, that are everywhere, made out, as you say, out of ebony, out of, you know, all these luxury, you know, gold plate, well, gold, gilded materials, gilded bronze, I guess. And I think that brings us back here to the next question is, I think you trace the origins of the proliferation of ornamental blackness to the court of Louis XIV at Versailles. Now they didn't have presumably they didn't have that many. Did they have a lot of black slaves at Versailles then, or were they just copying what they'd seen in England and other countries? I don't know enough about the history.
They actually did have black servants at Versailles, and they brought them in for some of the for Louis' divertissement. And yes, they were. It wasn't teeming with black servants, but there were absolutely black servants there. There were black groomsmen. There were black women in the that were working, in the household. There was even a rumor about one of his wife, I think, having a black child and sending it away to a nunnery. It's all kinds of stuff. There's there's dwarves and exotic types that are coming through. There was one point he had imported these black galley slaves in to replicate this sort of a war or some kind of a procession, in the at Versailles. So there's a lot of that. It becomes, blackness is part of the entertainment.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have things like costumes that are black figures in costumes for ballets. Now you don't know whether a black person was in that costume or a courtier was wearing the costume, but it's about imagining that these black figures are there. And you see this Jean Lepotre court ballroom etching, and this was a celebration where the queen, the daughter of the king, of course, all of the names are out of my head, is sitting on the left, and she's got two black slaves chained to her throne or the seat where she's sitting, and all of these men carrying these the foods are black servants in livery to the court. This is, I think, her birthday or like a carnival. So and again, are they really black people, or are they dressed as black people? It doesn't necessarily matter, because again, it's part of the entertainment, it's part of the courtly life. And that's, and I don't want to say that it started here, but I do feel like it, like I said, you said it gets proliferated from here because it was a very influential court, and the records are there, and I could read them. So yay. And the records talk about the blackamoors he created in silver, and his mother, Anne of Austria, had a collection. She was influenced by Cardinal oh my goodness, Mazarin, who's Italian. Her very close friend and advisor, etc., influential Cardinal Mazarin. He also influenced a lot of design and style, etc. He brought in works and supposedly started this taste for tables with black people holding them up. So and then you start seeing it everywhere. I mean, you start seeing it in England. You start seeing it in Germany, and the Netherlands have their own kind of form of it, which is these cabinets you see, and they're all cropping up in the 17th century. I feel like some of the artisans that are creating these objects are coming from the north to the south and influencing courts, and even in as lower south as Italy, like these Steinhardt brothers, or I'm going to say they're German, I could be wrong, but they're working in the court at Palazzo Colonna and create this spectacular case with these blackamoor figures. And this is ebony or ebonized. So it's either ebony, the top is ebony, but the bodies are ebonized, I think, because made to look, dark, because it's very hard to put a veneer on something like that body. But at any rate,
ebony presumably is very hard to carve, I would think.
I think it's very hard.
Hardwood,
and it's basically always a veneer because it was so expensive and precious.
Yeah.
So they could carve a flat thing, but it's not like a solid log of ebony. And there's a lot of white in the actual ebony thing, but it's very black. But so it's not a solid trunk. But anyway, it's an item that is sought after throughout Europe.
And the emphasis in this chapter is on the chains, on the fact that these people are captive. I mean, you've got some really, I mean, here we see these chains and well, I suppose it's like the equivalent of a ball and chain. I don't know what you call that thing that's weighting him down, a shackle, yeah, to the floor.
Yeah, I mean, and they're gilded, but yeah, what I tried to do in the book is not hit the same note in every chapter. Because one chapter is talking about the courtly influence, another chapter is talking about what's going on in England and the influence there, and then this one is taking a group of things from different places and talking about the notion of the captive, like the vanquished, because these are not, there's a bigger trend in European art at the time of depictions of prisoners. And they're not all Black, of course, you know, the famous Taka monument where the people, so the prisoner aesthetic is kind of translated here. So you got to get both going at the same time. And
but these are really horrific, these images of the slave collars and the chains. And it's so extraordinary that this is celebrated.
Desired. And these are both, like on the left, the Brustolon Portovaso is a Venetian set that is still in the museum, that the Ca Rezzonico in Venice. You can go and see them. There's like 9 or 10, and they're created to hold the collection of Japanese vases that the collectors, which is the Venier family, a Venetian, you know, well-to-do family, had like a colonnade or a portico area room in their home where people would walk through, and then you have your display your porcelain collection, and then these are made. That's why they're called Portovaso, for the porcelain collection. So what do you have holding your porcelain collection? A naked slave. Okay, where does that even come from? But this doesn't happen till almost 1700. And so people want to say that this style was born in Venice, but I just think it gets popularized and kind of kitschified, if that's a word, in Venice. Even though this
word, if it doesn't exist.
It definitely exists, still exists now, but people think of it as Venetian, but I think it's more widespread, as we saw some of those earlier examples from the Netherlands and France.
Yeah.
It feels
Out of interest. Sorry, go ahead, Abigail.
Oh, I was just going to say, it feels like it's more of a much broader cultural moment, really. I mean, it's the same moment that you get sort of stories like Afrobain's Orinoco is at the end of the 17th century as well, and then becomes, you know, one of the most popular plays in England for most of the 18th. And sort of all of, this moment across, there's a sort of increased visibility and interest in representing that in the artistic and decorative side of things, isn't there? Yeah.
And then of course you think of the mid 1600s, when the Americas really start, the slave trade comes, or the slave system really blows up in the Americas in the 1660s. The different companies, the French West India Company, and the same thing with the Dutch, and they're all kind of, this is a huge age. They call it age of exploration, but it's also the age of colonialism, and the trade has dispersed Africans all over the place. So it's very much part of the rise in wealth in Europe in different pockets. And then it's also a trend, again, because the Germans are all in, but they're not really heavily into this slave system in the way that the English and the French are.
Yeah, so here we've got this is the German, he's a what is he, a prince? I can't remember what is.
Augustus the Strong is the Elector of Saxony, so there's no Germany yet, but you know, and these are the German states, and he models his court off of Louis XIV. So he's got like his pageants where he would play an African chief, and he'd have the people coming in, whether they were real Africans or not. There were real Africans in those parades. But the notion is that, okay, you can be an African chief, that's dignified with feathers and all of that. And then you have a retinue, you know, of other servants and slaves. And it becomes a part of a pageant that ends up, those figures and pageants often end up getting carved into little bitty ditty things that are all in the treasury of the bitty ditty.
Then you get things like this as well.
That's an academic term. I'm going to write my next book on bitty ditty things. Yeah. So the style and the courtly flourish gets objectified in things like these objects created for the court, for his treasury, especially. He was really into his treasury. Precious jewels, the pearl. I mean, there's a whole aspect of this with pearls, where you find pearls being worn or being put on servants, often dark skin, pearl earrings, pearl necklaces, to show the contrast and the beauty and the luminosity. Pearls are also being harvested by Black servants in the Black people, in pearl diving in the Caribbean. So there's that link as well. But pearls are an important part of this commodity, association of commodity. This is an emerald here in the middle with this guy, who to me is the most offensive of everybody. He's smiling and grinning. You very rarely find anything smiling and grinning. So minstrel-like before the minstrel tradition. I can't even call him a minstrel, but he's based on an actual costume for that someone drew of a Native American, a Floridian Native American. So there's kind of all of this collapse between America, Africa, blah, blah, blah. So they're, again, fantasy figures. And then here on the right, these two holding pearls. So they're all doing in the process of serving you.
Yeah.
Or
gosh. And then you move into the Meissen, which you talked about a little bit before.
Yeah, and this was my first publication on this, and it has become like the foundational text in this whole business. And I don't like to toot my own horn, but it really has. So and it was just
you really pushed the envelope forward here. Yeah.
Yeah, and now there's so many people working in this field.
Well, that's great. Yeah, I mean, but I mean, one question which, is slightly off-piste here, but I think it may be a question I've asked you before, which is, I mean, how are these objects interpreted? When you go in somewhere like the Dresden Treasury or into the Palazzo Caorosonico, in Venice, do they interpret them in any kind of critical way, or are you just left to see them and wonder?
Well, places like in Venice, I've been there 3 times, I think. I'm going to be going there in May, so we'll see. The first time there was no interpretation. The second time there was a contemporary artist who they had do an intervention. And so, but they don't do a lot of interpretation even about the intervention, but she had turned their backs and had put some different things on there. So they were calling attention to something about these pieces. And then the last time I went back, I don't think there was a lot of interpretation. I don't think that the Italians tend to lean toward that kind of critical interpretation. And they certainly were not in Dresden, but there's publications in Dresden that are trying to start unpacking this.
Right. Because I think in the UK, I mean, I haven't been to any of the National Trust properties, that have really tried to tell the stories of slavery. So I'm assuming that when you go into a National Trust property and there's an object like this, there is some kind of a label. Abigail, do you or Adrienne?
Yes, I could talk for a very long time about the National Trust and curating. I did a master's in architectural legacies of empire across Britain, so we looked a lot at that, Adrienne. But no, I mean, it also vastly varies from property to property, and some of them, for example, Kedleston has the huge collection of it's the India Museum in the basement, which is large quantities of the huge collection of Lord Curzon, who was the viceroy in India in the early 19th century, and they made a choice to actually go back and do nothing to it to preserve. There's a strange argument, and they've also gone through many different curators very quickly, I think, because it's a huge task of a job to address that and recontextualize it. But they kept the original labels from the 1920s, 1930s, and they haven't been changed at all. I mean, personally, I really think that's an interesting choice, but I think it needed sort of contextualization as well. It does give you a great insight into exactly how those objects were being thought about. Anyway, I will stop talking about that and we'll go back to your
Well, I just have to, I love telling the story about how the National Trust asked me to, I was doing some interpretive work. There was they are trying to interpret certain things. So they asked me to interpret for some kind of a education packet, one of the Moors, and I picked out a set that the owner, there was still an owner, so it wasn't all there. So they said, okay, well, you can reproduce it only if I can write a rebuttal to her entry. Then I hadn't even written it yet. So the owner was good, and he actually did write a rebuttal to something I hadn't written yet, but he figured I was going to be kind of critical and start talking about these things. So I guess that's fair. But I, of course, am not going to be the only one with the rebuttal in the publication. But so we decided not to do that. But there is a sentiment out there that we're kind of adding a presentist view. We're talking in present terms about something that's old, but I feel like I'm grounding mine in that history of when it was happening. And that the blindness of these, or maybe they're not even really blind, maybe they know exactly what they're doing. I mean, these are still the same people who are perpetuating the actual problem. So, so anyway, I feel like if there's no interpretation of anything in the historic home, sometimes you can't put a label on everything, every little coffee pot. You can't do it. So they're not going to just have this one. So it's really a tough problem.
I've also been to somewhere sort of before you go into that room, there's a little notice or something that says there are some items of furniture in the next room which some may find offensive. But I think it's more interesting if you actually do something with that and say something about it and what it was, you know.
It's not just offensive. I think people understand this is from another time, but let's talk about what that means. I don't think people.
Absolutely, we need to talk about it.
What it means, then it is offensive because you don't understand it. But once you understand it, it's not offensive anymore, I feel.
I mean, it's something that it's fascinating, and you talk about it so eruditely.
Oh, thank you.
No, you do, and expressing all of these very nuanced ideas. But you know, I guess within the space of a museum label, it can be much harder to do that. But doesn't mean it's not worth the efforts. Sorry, go on, Nicola.
No, I was just going to say, I think, you know, there are a couple of slides here about something that Adrienne touched on earlier, which is sort of contemporary artists' interventions, which can be a really powerful. I mean, this one is extraordinary. This is something that Adrienne, you saw in Florence, isn't it?
Yes. Now this, earlier I talked about being at that exhibition where they commissioned contemporary artists to intervene into the Blackamoor bonanza that they have at a place called the Villa La Pietra. Thank goodness for Villa La Pietra. It's owned by NYU. It's an old villa that belonged to the Acton family, the English Acton family. At any rate, there's a lot of these figures, like all throughout the house, an inordinate amount, and that might be because the Actons might have been antique dealers later. But anyway, they're all still there, and so they thought at one point we've got to figure out what to do with this. So they had a convening of scholars. I was lucky enough to be able to go, and then they did an exhibition. And this was one done by Lyle Ashton Harris, who was in the middle. He's the person in the middle facing left, and nude Black men intervening in the Villa La Pietra, and because there are so many of these statues that are nude men, Black men, frozen in in time there, and what would it mean to have a real visceral nude Black person who's hot or breathing and has is flesh and blood and walking around in your home and standing there. And so he took a lot of photos of these guys all over the villa. I mean, it just really makes you think, wow. And I said to him, because he's an artist that I know, I said, where did you find these people? He said he got one of them selling like Louis Vuitton off the street in in Florence. One of them is another artist, and so it's and the friend. So he just got some kind of guys that are throwing into relief what it really means to have a laboring or a body, and then they're so calm and relaxed, you know, that's like they are owning and taking it over.
Mm. It's
So
incredibly powerful.
it is, it really is.
Yeah,
There's one of them
I
with
think
one of the guys lounging on a chair. It's
yeah.
really interesting.
No, I
And
think it really brings it home to you how anomalous it is that these things were just everywhere. You know, I
yeah.
mean, yes, I mean, I don't really buy in this instance. I don't buy the presentist argument because, you know,
Mhm.
we have to look critically at history. You know, if we're ever going to move forward with a better world, I suppose that's a very utopian, optimistic point of view. But you know, we have to try and learn from history and learn about the mistakes that have been made in the past and try and do better. So I think we do have to have this kind of very critical discussion. Um, I mean, it's blatantly obvious, isn't it?
And you
Yeah,
know, it's
exactly.
also, I think one of the things maybe we may not have time to talk about was the notion of beauty being a factor here. And you see the difference between the figure in the background, the gold woman in gold. She has a male figure that is accompanying her, but he's not in there. And these guys are like replacing, I guess, replacing that. But
Mhm.
the beautification, these objects being of luxury materials, they're shiny, they've got pearls and, you know, gems, um and they're one of a kind. So all of that gets throws, it's kind of a little smoke and mirrors about what you're really looking.
Mhm. Yeah,
And this
yeah,
kind of thing says, no, you're looking at somebody like this. You're
yeah,
looking at
yeah,
someone
yeah,
who they're
yeah, like
referencing somebody like this.
yeah, yeah. Well, listen, I think it's now in UK it's 5:45. I think we should open for questions. I mean, Adrian, Abigail and I have a few more questions, so if people don't ask them, we can ask you some more. But I think let's try and Abigail, are there any questions in the chat box? I might
Uh,
just stop the PowerPoint for a minute.
Yeah, you can either, to our audience, you can put your
There we are.
questions into the chat, or there is a button that also says questions. We would.
Can you stop share so that we don't have
Yeah,
to
I'm
see?
going to stop
Oh,
share now. That's exactly what I'm going to do. If I can figure out how to do that. Let me
um,
see. Wait a minute. You're still
on
seeing my screen. Sorry. Uh,
on the
where are we?
bottom.
Yeah,
Uh,
stop sharing. There we are. Great. Oh, I can finally see myself. So, well, that was amazing. So, do we don't have any questions yet?
None yet, but to our audience, please do ask away.
Maybe we should ask Adrienne the last question we were going to ask her about. What do you hope readers will take away from
Mm,
Ornamental Blackness? You know, what
yeah.
kind of conversations
Mm.
would you like to see
It sounds like
happen? I
it's
mean, I
already
think it probably,
sparked new conversations as well within at least the academic world, and it's become a focus. So
yeah, there's a lot of interesting questions. I hope that I mean, people are going to enter this into a lot of different levels. There's a lot of students and PhD students and curators and things who are looking at it for one reason. And then I wanted to make it accessible enough for anybody to look at it, even if you're just looking at the pictures, to see how our material world, I think, is more complicated than and in this insidious kind of way. And it could be good, it could be, but to look at what's around you, and to look at how certain types of people are pictured, um, to think about how race is characterized through representation that you might not even know you're being influenced by. And how history is kind of fun. You know, I mean, it was fun in many ways doing this.
yeah.
well,
Um,
there is that tension, as you were saying, between the beauty of these objects and the horror of them, you know, at the
Mm,
same time, which
mm,
that photograph really brings home, doesn't it?
yeah, and then the histories of things like in this world, this book is kind of in starts in the 1660s and ends right at, so that's sort of the time when the slave
mm,
trade is heating up, and then it kind of ends basically ends after the abolition of slavery in the United States. So during that, between 1660 and 1870, 1860, 70. So looking at that time and seeing how that really tumultuous time is, it was a factor in so many different things in Europe, including objects like ceramics and silver. You just don't think of those objects being part of this issue. And guess what? In America, we see a lot of objects from our history, these decorative objects like Aunt Jemimas and Mammies and things like that, that are kind of, if you will, I hate to use this word, but lowbrow. They are not the fine objects, but they also carry a lot of meaning and were created at a time when, during Reconstruction, post-Reconstruction, when they wanted the Black people to be really controlled. So they're kind of related to those, and then they're not. I have seen a lot of collectors, Black African-American collectors, who are seduced by the beauty of many of these objects and collect them. Collect the jewelry, the pins, like we saw Princess, whatever her name was, wearing the
Princess Michael of Kent, wasn't it?
Yes,
Was it her?
yes, in the Blackamoor pin. I didn't get to that chapter. I just fell apart. I couldn't do another thing. So that's the next thing. But yeah, we see people, Black Americans, and I must say seduced. That doesn't mean that there's something wrong with them, but they really are. They are so enamored with the fact that you could make a Black figure beautiful, because of the way we've been treated in the United States. It's not that way. That they want to collect those pins and earrings and necklaces. I even have earrings. I was going to wear them today. I had to buy them.
There's this sort of, I think, that tension between obviously the beauty of these objects and the really complicated history surrounding them, that then I think maybe the tendency is to shy away from and not talk about the fact that they are also beautiful, but perhaps that actually sheds more light even on the power that they had at that moment in history to perpetuate these ideas with such sort of subtle, insidious power, really. Also, we do now have a question.
I have a question.
From,
yes, I've just seen it. So would you like to read it out?
She's asked, did you come across any ambiguous Black figures? I know of Carpo. Why born enslaved? Do you see the envy of white people towards the beauty of Black bodies?
Do I see the what? The envy? Did she say
the envy?
Envy.
Okay,
Maybe
so
desire. Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot written, of course, about the Black
Carpo,
body and beauty, and is it Sabrina Stringer who has the famous Fearing the Black Body? It's her book, isn't it?
Oh, I don't know that, so you should send me that.
Oh, well, no, go on. I mean, answer in terms of what you've come across and things. It's more fine art and things and decorative, just.
But so the first question was, say it again, about the Carpo.
Yes,
the Carpo is Why Born Enslaved. Yeah.
Right.
Which, of course, you did an exhibition about at the Met.
Yeah, I was part of a little exhibition there, and so I guess she was saying ambiguous. That's the word
yes, ambiguous. Sorry, I don't know of the object being referred to, and I bungled how I
guess what she means ambiguous. I'm saying she, it might be a he. They mean ambiguous because it is beautiful and striking and individualistic, but there's also a lot of talk when we were really thinking about it for that show at the Met, thinking about how the woman is straining and she's being restrained, like the Vanquished, like those, and she's straining against that, and her face is so she's, and it's very sexual and almost like sexually assault, not almost. And then the caption, Why Born Enslaved? So it's supposed to be an abolitionist question, like, and this is done well after the abolition of slavery in France, which was 48, and this was done in the 60s, and it was originally did not have that caption. So it's ambivalent and ambiguous, because what is the intention here? Was it to eroticize a Black woman based on this sort of history of captivity, or was it to say, oh, it's elicit sympathy for the question of slavery? So that's why and we can't put our finger on it. Carpo there wasn't a lot about him in terms of this topic. I think, but there was more with Cordier in terms of the
Yep.
topic, much more. He was an avowed abolitionist, but also, look, they eroticized these Black women's bodies, period. And they eroticized women's bodies. So,
Yeah.
but the
And
Black
that's,
woman
that's not done either in this sort of abolitionist imagery either, is it? You know, that's still, it's, yeah.
So it's wrapped up in how women are perceived and all of that. It's still a really beautiful sculpture, though. I mean, when you see there are so many. It's been reproduced so many times in so many ways, even in soap, I think, or not soap, candle. You know, the French candle company. But the white marble one they have at the Met is really spectacular, and the treatment of the hair and the fierceness of it. So it's real complicated, yeah.
Yeah, and the tension between the eroticism and the criticism, you know, the abolitionist intention is something that Adrienne and I explored in our exhibition at the Henry Moore Center in Leeds, Race, Sex and Anxiety, and how these Black women's bodies were constantly eroticized and highly colored and used all these gorgeous materials, often by people who saw themselves as, you know, sympathizers with the abolitionist cause.
And we actually, I forgot that we had the David Beinman's Why Born Enslaved, right? Plaster that was painted gold, painted bronze.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you can see the Henry Moore Institute has a good website. So if you're interested in those kind of images, you could go to their website and have a look. The exhibition, there's a whole website that's still up there.
Yeah. I feel like we need to do another version, another part 2, because we have so much more stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think the Blackamoor, I mean, the Blackamoor project, you know, that would be a great exhibition.
Well, I'm
I mean,
putting it out there. I don't know who's on the in this webinar, but I would like to do something. There's a lot of I'd like to do something. I thought maybe a historic house would be a good place to put, but someone else said no, an empty room and you can so whatever. But I would like to do so. Obviously, it has to be something that is supported by an institution, because it's not something I could do on our own. Somewhere where there are a lot of material, and that's usually going to be in Europe. But I think it would be an interesting, even if it's small, I think it would be an interesting exhibition. I don't know about in the UK, but in the United States, there's so much cultural contention when it comes to thinking about race. They're canceling or getting rid of university departments dedicated to African American studies in universities, and the Trump administration is really trying to quell all of this as illegitimate or racist. So I think it's affected this whole query.
And yet it really does need to be talked about, because the images are everywhere. They are so ubiquitous, you know.
Yeah.
And not, as you were telling us before, not always interpreted. So yes, let's hope somebody listening might be able to help us. But you know. Great. Well, listen, it's coming up to 6 o'clock in London, and I know Adrienne is about to go off on a little holiday.
Yes.
So I think we should just thank Adrienne very, very much for a wonderful talk. Encourage everybody to buy her book, and thank all our listeners. There it is. Yeah, published by Yale, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you all very much.
Yeah, thank you for coming, and do come again. This talk has been recorded and it will be available on YouTube. So in probably in a week or so. So if you want to send it to friends, you know, send them the link. Please spread the word. And we get most of our views on our YouTube channel. It's on the Athena Art Foundation YouTube channel. But if you follow us on Instagram, we'll trail it there. So anyway.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much. It's been a wonderful conversation.
Thank you, Abigail. Bye-bye.
Bye. Abigail, so will you shut it? Because I'm not sure how to stop the
Yes, I
recording.
can. And I'm not sure whether I think we changed the settings so it would record online, but if we don't see it appear, it's probably on one of our computers like last time.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think we changed that setting, but I now don't remember. It was a while ago. Okay.
Yeah, no, I think we did too. Okay, great.
Right. See you soon.
Okay, bye. Bye-bye, everyone. Bye.